All right, it's great seeing you all. I was afraid that rain was going to scare you off, but not you. You are Jesus strong. There you go. All right. Well, look, we really are thrilled that you're here. We're very excited about this series that we began a couple of weeks ago. Thrive, I talked about what makes a person thrive. Last week, Dr. Parham talked about what makes a marriage thrive. If you weren't here, you can go on our website or Facebook and watch that message. It was really very, very good, be helpful to you, I think. Next week is what makes a family thrive. And one of our favorite counselors here in the area, Janet Nicholas, will be here. She'll be speaking, and I hope you'll be here for that. But I'm also excited about this week. What makes a child thrive? Now, if you're like me, you believe that your children are your greatest blessing and your biggest responsibility. And I just find that everyone wants to be a really good parent, a really good grandparent, but it can be challenging. These little kids, they're different than we are. Even when they grow up, they're different than we are. So how do we continue to help them all along the way? Well, I am so grateful that we have brought in a real expert to give us some good direction on that. Dr. Maria Elsa Soto Leggett is the chair of the counseling department at Houston Baptist University. She's Ph.D. She's a licensed professional counselor. She is a registered play therapist, so she specializes in kids. And we've asked her to come and share her wisdom with us. Let's let her make her feel very welcome as she comes forward. Thank you. And as she does, let me say that you've been very good about texting questions. When she's done, Michelle will come up and use some of your questions for a little Q&A period. So you'll see the number there on the screen. We'd love to get some questions from you. Thanks for being here.
So much. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you here. It's always such a privilege to talk about children and have somebody actually listen to what I'm saying. But most importantly, it is such a blessing to be in a place of worship. And just, again, thank you so much. So when I speak to parents, there's a couple of things that I always like to remind folks, that you are a parent until the day you go to be with the Lord. If you have children or grandchildren, they are a part of your life, and they are in your thoughts and your concerns and prayers all of your days. And when I speak about children, I'm not only speaking about children who are 4 months old or 4 years old or 14 years old, but even 40 years old, because we always continue to have a relationship with them. So I'm hoping that this connects with you, regardless of where you are in your relationship with your child. So I thought about what are some typical things that I have to share with parents as they ponder how to be a good parent, how to participate in the blessing that God has given them through these little people. And so I came up with 5 things that are typical pieces of information that I share. And one is to know that developmentally, your child is in a different place than you are. They are not a little person, a little adult. They're at a different developmental level. So developmentally, that means their cognitive, emotional, social, and intellectual place is different than where you are. Even when they're adults, you're still at a different place. And so always recognize that your place is different from them. And as they grow through those developmental stages, it is not just a forward trajectory. Sometimes those things go back and forwards, sometimes they go sideways. There are a lot of different things that participate in that development and help them to thrive. So one of the things that we know that we have to be conscious of in their developmental process is time. Balancing the time that our children have. Sometimes we like to fill that time up with activities and sports and studying and friend groups, and we suck up every minute of the day. And when we do that, we're denying other pieces that need attention. We know that sleep is important to our children. It's important to all of us. at all ages. But children really actually need more sleep, and that varies at different ages. But when we fill their time up with that, those other activities, they're not getting the sleep that they need to grow and to be nurtured and to thrive. We also see that eating is important. Well, we know it's important. It may be more important to some of us than others, but we need to make sure that we're giving our children time and balance in their meals and in their meal times, that they're not rushed, that they're not a last-minute thought. Now, I have always been a working mom, and so I didn't always cook a meal, but we did make sure that we had time for our meals. Our family meal time was breakfast rather than dinner, and it gave us a good start to our day. When we balance out that time, we leave opportunity for spontaneity, to have some moments where we can just do something unplanned. How exciting is that? Sometimes we get so rigid in our time and schedules that we don't allow that. Or sometimes our children want to do this rather than that, and we're so focused on that needs to be done. And we need to go with that spontaneity with our children. And so in that time balance and spontaneity is play. Yeah, play. So I'm a play therapist. I think play is important. But I was really happy that recently they shared a research results that echoed what we already know, that play is very important. It gives our children time to be creative. It gives them time to problem solve. When they play with other people, it allows them to role play life situations and to resolve conflict. So we know it's important. Play is important for us at all ages. So that's something that we should also think about. As we go through all of those developmental pieces, the other thing that's really important is that we connect with our children. And that means looking at them, sometimes lowering ourselves to be at the same place that they are. And even though they may not be looking back at us, to make sure that we're still looking at them, to make eye contact with them, to have that conversation or some time where we're not talking over a tablet or over a phone, but in face-to-face. So just as Jesus said, let the children come unto me, it's also important that we also go and be with our children. The other piece that I think is real important, or the second category, is feelings. So when children are little, they have 4 basic feelings: happy, sad, angry, and fear. And they grow in their emotional intelligence as they develop, as they grow up. But those are things that we actually have to contribute to. They don't have that class in school. And so some of that has to come from the home. And as children are growing in their feelings, to help them thrive, we have to recognize that feeling with them. So when they're happy, we say, you're happy. When they're sad, we say, you're sad that happened. When they're angry, we say, you're angry. We recognize the feeling rather than confuse them and say, you're not angry. You'll get over that. That's not really, that really didn't make you mad. Then we confuse them. It's like, well, no, I thought I was angry. And we're telling them, no, you're not. So then they're really confused. So it's okay to have those feelings. We find all of those feelings in the scripture. So we know they were given to us by God, and we need to celebrate them. We need to be happy. We need to be joyful. We need to weep. We need to be angry. But as we have those feelings that may be of anger and grief and sadness, we really need to also learn to regulate those. And when we regulate those means that they don't take control of the situation. that we have this feeling of anger, and so we're understanding it and trying to figure out what to do with it. It's not the feeling that's wrong, it's what we do with it that can be wrong. So when your child is learning to self-regulate their feelings, they sometimes don't know how to. That means you have to come alongside of them and co-regulate. Just like when you're right alongside of them on that bicycle and you're guiding them till they can do it on their own, you're co-regulating their feelings for them. And that means taking a moment. When they're angry, recognizing that, pausing for a moment to take a breath, and then discovering where does that feeling come from? What's happened that's made you angry? And understanding it. When we do these things with our children, we are modeling empathy. So empathy is when we care about someone else's feelings, when we care about what's happening to them, when we understand the feeling. Now, sometimes people think that means I accept it, I agree with it, and that doesn't mean that. We can understand and empathize without agreeing. And I say that because every once in a while, my children will make a decision that I don't agree with, just every once in a while. But I want to be present for them, and I want to empathize. When I model that empathy, then my children learn to be empathetic as well. So they learn to care about how I feel about something, how their father feels about something. But even more importantly, they care about how the other people outside of our family system feel and how to be caring and giving. When we do all these things, we create what's called a secure attachment. And secure attachment can follow a person all through their lives, in their careers, in their marriages, in their families, in their relationships. And in order for our children to have a secure attachment, they need to be safe. They need to feel like they're in a safe place. They need to be seen, like we see what you're doing. They need to be soothed, and they need to feel secure. So even when they do something we don't like or don't agree with, they are secure that we're still their parent, that we're still caring for them. And much of that, if not all of that, is similar to the relationship that we have with God. Or I should say that the relationship God has with us. He sees us, he keeps us safe, he soothes us, and we are secure in that. When we develop that pattern of recognizing their feelings and staying with them when they feel bad, helping them work through that feeling, we create this predictability. We are predictable in how we're going to respond to our children, but not perfect. There's so many times I wasn't perfect, but I was predictable. I was going to be there. And that also adds to that ability to thrive. Then your children can go out and try new things and know that they can come back to you when those things don't work out. So predictable, but not perfect. We also see that people are confused with praise and encouragement. So praise is compliments, right? I like your dress, I like your shoes, I like the way you wear your hair, I like the grade you made on that test, I like the way, the friends that you have picked. These are the things that we say about someone else's behavior or choices. So it's my judgment on what you have done, right? So if I praise this friend you have, but not that friend you have, that means I like this one, I don't like that one, right? Not that that happens. But with praise comes this idea that we are directing behavior, and we're directing the child's choices from the outside. And when we do that type of praising or only praising, we find that some people some children will behave in ways to receive praise from everyone. Rather than doing what they want for themselves, they do for others in order to get praise. So the other piece to that then would be to encourage. So encouraging is different. Encouraging is recognizing the effort and the thought and the time that something took. So rather than saying, I like your picture, I like the picture that you drew, I can say, wow, you put all your favorite colors in there. You really worked hard on that. That took you a long time. So I'm encouraging their thought, their effort, their time. As I think about how they're dressing, I might say, well, you really wanted to make sure that you picked out just the outfit that you wanted. And if you have a girl, sometimes they take a little longer to get dressed than guys. And so, and it can take time. You took a lot of time to pick out just the right pieces to make that look come together. You really like that outfit. So I'm not just complimenting the way they look. I'm complimenting their thought, their time, and their effort. That then helps them to be self-driven, to make their own decisions. We call that internal locus of control. So as they grow and thrive, they're doing things that come from their heart rather than from someone else's heart for them. As a parent, what I try to do is encourage and then praise. So I generally do a lot of encouraging and then add some praise because we know that as a parent, our children do want our approval. But I want to balance that. I really want to be heavy for me. This is just my perspective. Heavy on the encouragement and light on the praise because I want them to recognize their own creativity, their own efforts, their own thoughts. So sometimes I spend time talking to parents about behavior, discipline. And I'm sure no one here has a child or ever seen a child that needed some consideration of behavior or discipline. No. Someone always going, I'm so glad that's not my child on the floor. And sometimes that is my child on the floor. So behavior and discipline kind of takes a lot of thought. And I kind of have a couple of people that I like to draw on for that. Gary Landreth is a play therapist who talks a lot about choices. He has a whole curriculum on how to teach parents to play with their kids in a meaningful way. And he talks about choices, about shaping behavior with choices. And those choices should match a child's developmental level. So younger children have smaller choices, 1 or 2 items. And the more developed or grown they are, the more choices they have. So as a child, they may get to choose the red t-shirt or the green t-shirt to wear to school. If they're hungry before dinner and they just can't wait, they can choose to have 1 cookie or wait till dinner. So those are choices that you give them. They can choose between an apple or an orange. And as they get older, the choices get bigger and multiple choices. When we allow them choices, we are giving them some control of their life, which is so meaningful. And we're also helping them to have responsibility in their life. When we do advanced choices, then we're also adding consequences. So sometimes you have a house rule. All the bicycles have to be, well, do kids ride bicycles anymore? Oh, yes, okay, thanks. So all the bicycles have to be put up before dinner. And so that's a house rule. Or maybe all the toys pulled in, right, before dinner. And if they choose to put them up before dinner, then they choose to have 30 minutes of TV afterwards. Or a box. I used to call it a box. I guess now it's just a screen. But they choose to have 30 minutes after dinner. If they don't put those things up before dinner, then they have chosen no screen time after dinner. So there's not an argument. It's not a power struggle. It was a choice made by the child, and the consequences are then that they have to do the cleanup rather than the TV time. And it's just, I had a parent come in, ask me, my daughter always wants to play. I need her to do her homework. I said, well, how old is your daughter? She's in second grade. I was like, well, play is important for second graders. I said, but give her a choice to study 30 minutes and then play, 30 minutes and see how that works. You can play for 30 minutes after you've studied for 30 minutes if that's what you choose to do. That was a hard one for her. But choices are important. It really provides them some control over their own life. Dan Siegel, who does neuroscience and has done a lot of research that confirms what we've always talked about in counseling, that some of the processes that we do help to change the way of thinking and the way of behavior. He says that in those moments when a child behaves in a way that's not acceptable, that those should be teaching moments and insightful moments. In other words, when a child hits someone else, and I know my kid's not the only one that did that, but when they hit someone else, that child is telling you, something has come up and I don't know how to cope with it. I don't know how else to respond but to hit. And so we're to take that moment and teach them something different. But we can't do that if our emotions are heightened or if we're angry or tired. So we ourselves have to be calm, and we have to take that time to recognize the child's feelings, understand the situation, and talk about that. So we want to pause for a moment. We want to recognize the child's feelings and then have them tell me about what happened. And when they're telling us about what happened, you know what you need to do? Is you have to listen without speaking. That's listening without speaking. That's listening without speaking. I say that because that's like one of the hardest things for people to do. Listen, hear what they have to say, then discuss. You knew that was wrong to hit. You must have been very upset. I'm wondering what's been happening. What happened here? And then talk about what could be different. I will say that when someone's angry, when you're really angry or another person is really angry, that it's hard for them to hear. So you do need to wait for that moment of anger to kind of dissipate a bit. And that's where that pausing comes in. Chuck Swindoll, who has done a lot of speaking and writing about family relationships, also reminds us that you have to have a relationship first with a child, that you cannot discipline or shape behavior if you don't have a relationship. So that means if you're not in a daily relationship with your child, or if you've been away for a long time and you're just coming back into their lives, or if there is a struggle in that relationship, first consider what that relationship is before you begin to start, trying to teach and give insight. Because that relationship is important. That's back to that connecting, right? And the thriving. So we're down to the last one. Excuse me. And so that's the hardest one, I think. Because that last one is about you. And it's easy to tell our kids, do what I say, not what I do. But this is about you. And so about the turn of the century is when I first began working with children. And I've noticed that children always talk about their parents. I don't care if they were good parents or bad parents, if they're living or deceased. I don't care if the kid is 5 years old, 50 years old, or as my mom, 90 years old, she still talks about her father. She still talks about her mother that she only knew for 5 years. So that tells me parents are important. They're a very important piece of a child's ability to thrive. That means you are important, and you have some important work to do for yourself. You need to have insight about yourself. You need to know, you need to understand your emotions, how you feel. You need to regulate your emotions. You need to be in control of those, and you need to be observing the things that are happening. You also need to know your own story. So all of us come from a different kind of family. Some had good childhood experiences. Some had really rough childhood experiences. Some came from hard places. Some came from privilege. But we all have a childhood story that led us to where we are now. You need to make sense of that in a way that's not blaming or judging of your family and your parents. But your story. When you make sense of your own story, then you have the power to create your own future. When you create your own future, you open the door for your children to thrive and to go forward. So you have to make sense of your own story. Then you have to model. See, that's that little piece that's so hard to do. You know, you have to pause and observe. You have to be mindful and present. You have to be self-regulating. And you have to develop empathy. We talked about empathy, being caring for others, people's feelings and their situations. We generally can do that with our family system and our friends. But empathy should be something we do with our community. And even for those people we don't know, when we're called to what is it called, Stephen Ministry, those little pieces that we share our time and our money and our thoughts and prayers with. That's empathy. When we do that, our children will understand that better. So it's important that you think about how to develop your own empathy. And then you want to remember that you need to be predictable, but not perfect. We leave that to God and Christ our Lord, and we accept his grace because we're not perfect, but we are predictable. We're present. I might say the wrong thing sometimes. I might not remember all the details, but I'm here. I'm here with my child to go through those moments. And then the last thing, because I can't remember where I am, is to have one prayer and one hope for your child. I mean, it's great to say, I want my child to go to a good school, make good grades, get into a good college, have a good career, make lots of money, you know, and go on and on. But some of those things are external and they're temporal. Think about what you want internally for your child. What is a prayer that you have or a hope for them that is internal and eternal? So when my daughter was in the 5th grade, and that was her 5th school, because my husband is also in the Methodist ministry, and we had moved many, many times by that point. And her teacher, she is challenged with dyslexia. And her teacher wanted her very much to reach a certain score or points on her accelerated reading AR points. And that was a task. Everybody had to reach this set point. And so, that was a big push, and it was a lot of frustration for my daughter. I was just happy she was reading anything. And so then the teacher tried to shame my child. Then she tried to shame me for not pushing it. I was like, okay, now you've gone too far. And I had to say to the teacher, I said, I know this is important to you, but that's not what's important to me. At this time, what's important to me is that my daughter find peace in her new place and in her relationship with God. So you work on the AR points, and I'm going to work on the God thing, because that was my prayer, my hope. So that one thing. And I've kept that prayer and hope. I still have that prayer and hope going because life is challenging, and we always need that. I think my child always needs. I always need that. I hope for you that today has given you at least one piece of information that you can share in changing or building your relationship with your child of any age so that y'all can thrive together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Soto Leggett. We got so many questions in. We will not be able to answer them all here, but some of them we will be addressing later on our social media channels. So check out Facebook and all that. The first question, we're going to jump right in. The first question is, how would you help a child who is really struggling to cope with divorce?
That's always hard. Do you know that children of all ages, I've talked to adults who struggle with that. And sometimes the divorce is last year, and sometimes it's 10 years ago, and they're still struggling with it. So it's about recognizing their struggle, being with them in the moment, understanding it is hard. It will change. We can't take away pain,
Right.
but we can be with them through the pain.
Right.
And just being with them and cognizant of that.
Being present.
Yes.
Acknowledging their feelings.
Right, acknowledging it's so important.
Yeah, that's good. And the second one, we don't have time for too many, but the second one, we had someone write in last night, which I just think is so applicable to so many of us. How do you help a child who may be, 11 or 12, but they show a really great propensity in a sport, some natural talent. We've been directing some resources here, and now they want to quit the sport, but parents are thinking that they could get a really great scholarship in college. Like, what would you say to
Kind of
that?
like, I know better for you.
Yeah.
I think it's something that a parent and child really need to have a heart-to-heart conversation about. But I do warn the parents of forcing your child to do something they don't want to do. There's a reason they don't want to do that. Maybe they're really interested in something else that you haven't given them permission to do yet. And so recognizing that. I understand the need for the scholarship.
Right.
But I would also say we shouldn't limit what God has for us and what God has for our children and what the Holy Spirit will do. I just think we have to have faith. And sometimes we have to let that play out over time,
Right.
but certainly not to force a child.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I want to remind everybody that this conversation applies to a conversation we'll be having later in October. The Knowledge series with Dr. Madeline Levine is going to be here on our campus, and she's an author and a researcher who has addressed the at-risk population that exists in our higher socioeconomic status populations, which is the Woodlands, right? And so our children are struggling with extremely high rates of suicide, extremely high rates of substance abuse, and very at-risk behaviors. So depression, anxiety, all of that. So we want to invite you to come out to that. There's information in your connection guide. Thank you so much.